Hey everyone, it's another morning of me wearing a shirt, which means another company visit. Today I'll be going to Active Gaming Media, where I'm going to be sitting down for some localization with Anthony Thompson. I think localization is one of those things that a lot of you guys are simply like, oh yeah, just use ChatGPT and that's everything. But I think there's more to localization, so I wanted to hear from an actual localization company. How does it work and what are some things you should keep in mind? So let's go. So thanks for wanting to meet me, Anthony. We spoke a bit already online. I did my stalking on LinkedIn, but can you maybe give a quick introduction of like, how did you end up here in Japan? What is your job? And like maybe a bit of, we're here at Active Gaming Media, what do they do?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So how did I end up in Japan? I made a mistake and I came here on vacation one time. And long story short, that was about 15 years ago. Okay. And after I went back home, I was still a university student, so I decided I wanted to come back to Japan. Yeah. I did a short little study abroad trip, fell in love with Japan even more. So after I graduated, I found a job here in Japan, pretty much like the normal way, teaching English. Did that for a while and then decided I wanted to get more like experience in other industries. And that's when I encountered Active Gaming Media. They do, obviously we work in the gaming industry. Mainly we do localization, marketing, and then we have our own publishing brand, Playism, as well. But we also offer a lot of other different services, and we try to help bring games, especially indie games, from like Europe, from Americas to Asia. Obviously Japan, but also like China, Korea, things like that. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of like an overview, short story.
That sounds interesting because we kind of did that. We like localized our game. I localized or like translated, honestly, not localized, our first game, Forge Industry, painstakingly by hand, like the entire game. And we got like a surprise hit almost of it now being our second or third largest country basically in terms of player base. It's like an automation game. Yeah, it surprised me as well. And that's when I was like, maybe I should take localization more seriously. And I think one mistake that we did was I just purely translated basically. I took like the dictionary of like Japanese and my grammar book and I like sentence by sentence did the entire game. It was like 10,000 words or something. It was crazy. But I feel like I did a lot of mistakes there. First of all, maybe I did the translation, but when we always speak about localization when it's like those companies, what are some key differences there basically between just translating and localizing?
Okay, I mean, I think you gave kind of an example of a translation. You have a grammar textbook and you have the language, so you're gonna translate directly, right? Yeah. So it's good for like documents. If you have like for example, like a bank document or something like that, you need to have those specific words. There's not much leeway in the translation aspect. Yeah. So it's a very A to B kind of translation. Whereas localization, there is not necessarily one way to do it because you're localizing, so you're creating a story in another language. The story should be the same story as the source language, obviously, but you can tell a story so many different ways. Yeah. So think of localizing as more of like storytelling. Translation is just making it understandable using the same terminology in both languages. I think would be like the biggest difference.
And I guess there's even more to localization than in terms of like when I go to like Google Maps here, for example, there's no check marks in Japan, I noticed. It's like the circles. Is it then also like something you have to involve with localization of like the more cultural aspects? Or I think maybe red is in the West like a color that is like bad, whereas here, or like at least in China, it's like a good thing. Those are all parts of localization then as well?
Yeah, so it depends on like how deeply you go into localization. I would say for most like indie games, if they're just doing like a text localization, you're focusing more on like the vocabulary, the expressions, things like that. There is like the deeper aspect where you actually go into like the gameplay, the footage, the colors, the symbols. You want to go ahead and potentially identify any things that might raise flags in the local country, where, like color. Even for example, red can be positive in China, but in Japan, if you write a name in red, it's not good.
Okay.
So, depending on the colors, the symbols, Japan is, like their religion would be like Buddhist and a little bit, mostly Buddhist to be honest. So you have a lot of Buddhist symbols, which maybe in Europe might not work so well. If you, for example, if you go walk on the street, the pothole covers, often they'll have some Buddhist symbol on there. So you want to be a little bit careful for those types of things. But generally speaking, I would say for most of localization for like indie companies, you're going to be focusing more on the text. You can if you have the budget, if you ask a localization company, they can go through, they'll play through the entire game, and then they will identify those flags as well. So those are some things that localization does, yes.
You mentioned budget, so I have to jump into that basically. How does like a localization company work? Is it like word count based, or like how do you determine the total price for a project basically? I just sent my game to you and it's like, okay, this is gonna be $10,000 or whatever, or is it you're like, hey, for every 10 words you pay this much, or how does that process work basically of getting a localization done?
Right, so if we, once again, referring just to like the text-based localization, we'll usually go by word count. Like if you do like the full localization, there's usually going to be like some standard price points depending on the language. Once again, English as the source language is the most common and it's going to be the cheapest. If your source language is French or Spanish or like maybe Russian, the prices can be very...
Does that happen a lot? Because I only know of like English first games. Do you get those games as well that are like only Russian coming in?
So we get a couple French games as a source language. There is one developer who they write the game in Polish, and then they themselves translate it into English, and then from English into whatever language. In that case, usually we'll do like a proofreading of the English, because once again, they're not native English speakers, so there might be some issues with their English. So do a proofreading of the English, and then from English into other languages. So if you do have your game in like a French or your native language, if you can find someone to translate it into English or do it yourself, it doesn't have to be perfect. Have someone do proofreading and then move into other languages, 5 or 6 other languages. It's probably cheaper than starting from your source language if it's not English.
Would you, because it's the proofreading, I didn't like fully think that was a thing, of course, as well that you can do. A lot of people in our audience, they are like AI bros. It's like the best way I can describe them. And they're like, just put your game through ChatGPT. It's great at translating. I feel like that's not the greatest approach. How do you see like AI has definitely had an impact, I feel, on localization and especially translation, I think. Has that had an impact here as well that you've noticed, or not really?
Yeah, I mean, overall, it has its benefits. It's good for professional linguists, professional translators, so to speak, because it can assist in like their localization. It'll make the mundane tasks easier to do, right? As with like any type of computer-based system. And you know, you got to look at it like kind of like 2 ways, where for some games, you know, you don't have the budget, or there's not really a reason to localize it into, you know, this language because you don't have a lot of like wish lists or whatever it may be. But you can use ChatGPT to at least present something, and then people living here can play the game in their native language. Whether or not the quality is there, that's to be determined at the time. So there are some like good things about like AI and using that to localize, but at the same time, quality of the AI translations are just not there, especially if you're going from like European languages to Asian languages.
Yeah, because the grammar is just so completely different, right? It's like I open any review here and I like do the translate to English and it's just horrible.
Right. So there's been a couple cases where, you know, I've worked with some indie developers and they said, yeah, we did our, we used ChatGPT or some type of translator tool, and you know, we did it into Spanish, from English to Spanish. And our audience said, oh, you know, it wasn't bad. Like, obviously some mistakes, but you know, it was playable. But when we did it from English into Korean or English into Japanese, like, we just got like so many negative reviews. And then so they looked at, okay, well, let's go ahead, let's have a professional do like the Japanese translation. So if you're looking at just getting your game into other languages so that people can play it, yeah, I mean, absolutely, do what you need to do. If you're looking at getting your game into, from English source language into like Asian languages, I would say it's worth the investment to actually have a professional do it, just because the quality is just not going to be there.
Yeah, one thing we did with Forge Industry that we should have done is I translated it to like every language. And you mentioned proofreading earlier. Is that like something you do as well here then, I guess? And is there like a ballpark of like, oh, it's a quarter of the price of a full localization? Do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So There's a lot of, depending on which company you go for and who you talk to, there's different like sub prices, right? So for proofreading, generally speaking, proofreading is going to be like 50% of the translation cost if you're just doing proofreading. A lot of times, I guess I should also mention that within the localization, you're going to have basically at least two linguists. One linguist is going to be doing the translation, one linguist is going to be doing proofreading. So that's why it's kind of like 50% of the cost. So if you need to proofread your English, your source language, you'll just add one more linguist over here. So then you'd have three linguists going through your text.
Yeah. Is it like the more languages you buy as a package, basically the cheaper it gets as well?
Yeah,
because like one translator can do maybe multiple languages or not as much?
No. If you run in, like freelance translators may be willing to do multiple languages, right? Generally speaking, we only use linguists that are specific for that language. So it has to be their native language. So for example, if you're going from English into Japanese, you're going to be using a Japanese linguist who also speaks English. If you're going from Japanese into English, you're going to be using an English linguist who also speaks Japanese. So the end language has to be a native speaker. So that's where the quality comes in.
Yeah, makes sense. One thing that we are like considering for our next game, and I want to like maybe hear your opinion on it, is we have an audience of at this point like 28,000 subscribers, and we got so many people because our game was not localized to like Portuguese or Spanish who are like, we'll localize your game for you. Do you have like experience with like crowdsourced translations? Is it like going to be a bit of a mess to deal with, or can it really be worth it in the end? Like, what is like your view on that?
There's nothing inherently wrong with like crowdsourced translations. Once again, sometimes you get lucky, and actually like some of the crowdsourcing people are actual translators, right? And they really love the game, they really love the project, so they're going to invest their free time into helping you do that. But at the same time, you also don't really know, but most of the time you won't really have a very familiar understanding of like what their vocation is. So whether they might be an engineer, they might be an artist, they might be a linguist. Once again, localization is a storytelling process. Not everybody can tell a story well.
Yeah, and I would guess also if you do like crowdsourced and you have like multiple people in the same language, like you lose that coherent plot, I guess.
Yes,
as well.
your consistency won't be there. Characters may have like different, like at one time they may be very happy, very excited, and then later in the dialogue when they should still be very happy, very excited, they might be more somber. So you'll have that inconsistency within the characters, potentially within the dialogue as well.
So you may still want to get up like with a proofreader at the end of the day, even if you get like the crowdsourced localizations, I guess, just to like double check, does this make sense? Yeah,
absolutely, and that's actually a really good idea. You know, if you have something that somebody else did for you, even if it's not crowdsourced. Let's say you have a friend who's not a professional linguist, but they're a good friend. They speak the language. They worked really hard and they did a pretty good job. But you're going to be releasing the game, or you've gotten some negative feedback potentially. Just have somebody check with a proofreader. That being said, depending on like the amount of changes that might need to happen, a localization company may say, proofreading is not enough. It's not a full translation, but we still need to change a lot.
If it's not quality enough.
Yeah. So they might not charge you a full rate, but it might be closer to like a 70-80% rate.
Yeah, and then at that point, you did all of the work and it's like, was it worth it?
Was it worth it for 20%? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
But,
one thing maybe that we are like struggling, or like not really struggling, but we're like not sure about is, okay, I want to localize my game. What do you do with your title? Do you keep it the same, or do you localize that one as well?
So this is, and I'll jump back to one of your previous questions. This is where like AI is not going to be able to help you, right? They're not going to say, oh yeah, you should translate the title because, or you shouldn't translate the title because. Basically, it depends on the title, and it depends on, a lot of times, just the developer, whether or not they want to, or if they don't want to. You can quote unquote translate the title. So like for example, you have the katakana. So just using like the same sounds. Or you can localize the title, right? So you can.
They have like the meaning more that you.
Just to like, maybe not potentially even the meaning, but just more to match the game. So a good example of this is Big Hero 6, the movie from Disney. In English, it's called Big Hero 6. In Japanese,
I have no idea.
Baymax.
Baymax?
Yes.
Oh, it's like how Fast and the Furious is also like, I forgot the name, but it's very funny. It's like...
Yes. I always forget the title of it in Japanese too. But yeah, well, they just...
I'll put it up on screen, like the Japanese title, but it's really funny.
Yeah. So it's completely different. It doesn't actually even match like the meaning of the title, but it matches the
vibes, basically.
Yes. Bingo.
Would you say that for like an indie studio, there's much of a benefit or a disadvantage to doing it? Or would you just be like, don't bother with it? Like, it's probably not going to be the big worries you should deal with right now.
I mean, I don't think it should be a huge concern at the end of the day. It's as long as the title is not something inappropriate in the native language, then it should be fine, whether you keep it or whether you don't. So you can just ask, if you have a linguist doing it, you can ask the linguist, say, hey, what do you think? Could you come up with a couple names? And then you can pick one that you like, or just keep it in English. That's okay. Maybe
one like a final question, or like probably just going to be like a little follow-up is, let's say I have 3 languages to choose from for localizing my game. And the budget is like, I know some languages are cheaper to translate a little. We leave that part apart. Like, I just want to sell as many copies. What would be like the languages I focus on, and like how much does genre maybe also matter in that? Like, if you're making a visual novel, I feel like Japanese and Chinese would be much more popular than if I'm making like an action shooter game.
Yeah, I mean, French would be good for visual novels as well, right? Oh. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, one language you should always translate into is simplified Chinese. There are more Chinese speakers on Steam, if we're talking about Steam, obviously. Yeah. There are more Chinese speakers on Steam than any other language. They're like 55% or something like that.
Okay, yeah, that's really big.
Yeah, so you're talking at least half your Steam player base are native Chinese speakers. So absolutely do simplified Chinese. After that, I would recommend Japanese because Japan is it's a huge market
for games.
Yeah, it'd be a shame to miss it. But like if you're talking about your third one, I mean, I would go off the genre, the wish list count, kind of where the interest is from, the game itself. Maybe it has some elements that just kind of match a certain culture, certain country. Just kind of be flexible for that third one,
What are maybe some genres, like for example, if you make a strategy game, you should always do German. What is like some similar genres for Japanese, where like if you're making a game in these genres, really try to get it localized to at least like Japanese as well?
I mean, for Japanese, RPGs, generally speaking, I mean, Japan is pretty viable for a lot of different games. Metroidvanias used to be really, really good, but now it's.
I feel like they've dropped off games in like Steam in general.
Yeah, so you'll get like a couple good ones, but generally speaking, there's just so many of them. It's really hard to find the good ones. It's hard to stand out. So I don't think there's like a specific genre that you say, okay, absolutely, you need to do Japanese for. There's just genres that would be good idea to do Japanese, which like RPGs, things like that would be okay. You talk about like Korean, first-person shooters. You definitely want to get into Korea, or any type of competitive game you want to get into Korea. For China, anything, everything.
Anything, because they're just so big.
Yeah, they're a big enough market. Even if only 10% of the market, you're still talking about like 60 million people. Yeah. So it's like,
Okay, no brainer that one. All right, thank you so much for having the time to sit down with me. I think I learned a lot already about localizations. I think our audience as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great to see you.
Yeah.
So, all right, take care.
So I think I learned a lot from this conversation. I hope you did as well. I think my key takeaway here is localize all of your store pages into like as many languages as you can. Not the full game, but just look at localizing the store page to see what languages are people actually interested in. And whether you're using AI or a full-on like localization company, for that store page doesn't really matter. It's just so you can get those statistics of what should I focus localization on, because especially localization, we learned it from German and Japanese for Forge Industry. It can be a massive boost in sales that you would just not be able to have otherwise. So definitely do that research. I hope this video taught you some more stuff. I'm planning one more of this where I'm also going to be talking with the press on how do you get your game covered by indie news outlets, so stay tuned for that next week. And apart from that, if you're new here, we're game developers. We try to cover the game development scene and also just our own learnings from making games. So if that's something that you're interested in, be sure to head down below and subscribe, as it really helps us out and you get this content twice a week. That's all I have to say. Thanks for watching and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.